The dust swirled like a devil's dance as Audrey Owens clung to the unstable beam, her heart pounding against her ribcage while the earth around her groaned with imminent collapse. Silver Summit Mine had been her father's legacy, but on this scorching day in July 1876, it threatened to become her tomb. Quentin Zimmerman wiped sweat from his brow as he guided his chestnut mare along the ridge overlooking Keeler, California. The small mining town nestled at the edge of Owens Lake had been his destination for 3 weeks of honest work before moving on, as was his custom. 6 years of drifting since the war had taught him to avoid putting down roots. Yet something about the silver-flecked mountains had convinced him to linger just a little longer. The distant rumble caught his attention first. Then came the plume of dust rising from the mountainside where the Silver Summit Mine entrance marked the landscape. Even from half a mile away, he could tell something had gone catastrophically wrong. Hiya! He dug his heels into the mare's sides, sending them racing toward the disaster. By the time he reached the mine entrance, a small crowd had gathered, mostly miners who'd been working other claims nearby. Their faces were grim as they stared at the collapsed tunnel. "What happened?" Quentin demanded, dismounting in a fluid motion. An older man with a salt and pepper beard stepped forward. "Tunnel collapse about 100 yards in. Old man Owens died last winter and his daughter's been running things since." "Anyone inside?" Quentin's stomach tightened. "Miss Owens herself," another man answered. "She went in to inspect a new silver vein about 30 minutes ago. No one else, thank the Lord." Quentin approached the mine entrance, seeing nothing but fallen timbers and rock. "Has anyone gone in after her?" The men exchanged glances. "Too dangerous," the bearded man said. "That whole section could come down any minute. We've sent for help from Lone Pine, but it'll be hours before they arrive." Quentin studied the devastation, calculating his odds. He'd seen enough mine collapses during his time in Colorado to know that waiting for professional help might mean finding only a corpse. "I'm going in," he announced, already removing his leather vest and gun belt. "You're a fool stranger," someone called out. "You don't even know the woman." Quentin ignored him, grabbing a lantern and pickaxe from the equipment shed. "I need rope and a shovel, and water, lots of it." The bearded man, who introduced himself as Silas, the mine foreman, helped gather the supplies. "The tunnel forks about 50 yards in." She was heading to the western branch. "Any other way in?" Quentin asked. "There's a ventilation shaft on the south side of the mountain, but it's narrow, not wide enough for a man." Quentin nodded, tying a bandana around his mouth and nose. "Keep watch. If you hear me call, I might need help pulling her out." With that, he ducked under the partially collapsed entrance and entered the darkness. The air inside was thick with dust and the stench of disturbed earth. His lantern cast eerie shadows as he carefully picked his way over debris. The main tunnel seemed relatively stable for the first 30 yards, but soon he encountered the major collapse. Hours passed as Quentin dug. His muscles burned with each swing of the pickaxe, each shovelful of rock and dirt. The sweat poured down his face, soaking through his shirt. Twice he had to retreat when shifting rubble threatened another cave-in, but he always returned, driven by a singular purpose. He had no personal connection to Audrey Owens. He'd seen her just once in town, a slender woman with auburn hair, her chin held high despite the whispers that followed her. A woman running a mine was unusual enough to draw attention, especially one as young and unmarried as she appeared to be. Near the 4-hour mark, when his arms felt like lead and his throat was raw with dust, Quentin heard a faint tapping sound coming from beyond the wall of rubble. "Hello." He called, his voice rough. "Can you hear me?" The tapping paused, then resumed more urgently. "I'm coming." He renewed his efforts, digging with desperate energy. After another hour of careful excavation, he created an opening barely large enough to crawl through. Lying flat, he shone his lantern into the cavity. About 10 feet away, pinned beneath a fallen support beam but sheltered by a fortuitous V of collapsed timbers, was Audrey Owens. Her face was streaked with dirt, and blood matted her hair, but her eyes were open, reflecting the lantern light. "You're alive," he breathed, relief washing through him. "Barely," she croaked. "The beam. My leg." Quentin squeezed through the opening, crawling toward her. The space was tight, forcing him to move on his elbows. When he reached her, he assessed the situation quickly. The beam across her legs wasn't crushing her completely. Another fallen timber had created a small space that prevented her from being flattened, but she was firmly trapped. "I'm Quentin Zimmerman," he said, offering her water from his canteen. "I'll get you out of here." She drank greedily, then looked at him with clear hazel eyes. "Audrey Owens, why would a stranger risk his life for me?" "No decent man leaves a soul to die if he can help it," Quentin replied, already examining how to free her. The next several hours were a grueling test of strength and will. Quentin carefully shifted smaller rocks, creating space around her. He used pieces of broken timber as levers to gradually lift the beam trapping her legs. All the while, the mountain around them groaned ominously. Audrey remained remarkably composed despite her obvious pain. When Quentin needed to rest, they talked. She told him about inheriting the mine from her father, about the townspeople's skepticism, about her determination to prove them all wrong by finding the rich silver vein her father had always believed was there. "Did you find it?" he asked during one break. A ghost of a smile appeared through the grime on her face. "I did, right before everything came down." By the 11th hour, Quentin had made enough progress to believe they could escape. Audrey's right leg was badly injured, possibly broken, but her left seemed functional. "I need you to help me," he told her. "When I lift this beam one last time, you need to pull yourself out, no matter how much it hurts." She nodded, steeling herself. With a tremendous effort, Quentin heaved the beam upward an extra few inches. Audrey cried out in pain but dragged herself forward until she was clear of the timber. When Quentin released it, the beam crashed down, sending a shudder through the surrounding rock. "We need to move," he said urgently, gathering her into his arms. "That sound means the mountain's getting ready to settle again." The journey out was harrowing. Quentin carried Audrey through the narrow passage he'd created, both of them gasping in the dust-laden air. Twice they had to stop as small rockfalls blocked their way, forcing Quentin to set her down and clear a path. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into the fading daylight. A cheer went up from the crowd that had grown throughout the day. Silas rushed forward with others to take Audrey from Quentin's exhausted arms. As they laid her on a makeshift stretcher, her hand caught Quentin's. 12 hours, she whispered, having kept track of the time by her father's pocket watch that had somehow survived the collapse. "You dug for 12 hours to save a stranger." Quentin, too tired for words, simply squeezed her hand before collapsing into a sitting position beside her, his muscles finally surrendering to exhaustion. Dr. Milton Wells, Keeler's only physician, arrived to examine Audrey. Broken right leg, various lacerations, possible concussion, but no immediate life-threatening injuries, was his assessment. "She's a lucky woman, or rather, fortunate in her rescuer." Quentin followed as they carried Audrey to the doctor's house, which served as the town's medical facility. Only once she was settled did he allow himself to be tended to, his hands raw and bleeding, his shoulders and back screaming from the hours of labor. "You're welcome to clean up and rest here," Dr. Wells offered. "What you did today was nothing short of miraculous." Quentin shook his head. I'll head back to my room at the boarding house." He glanced toward the bedroom where Audrey lay. Tell her I'm glad she's all right." For 3 days, Quentin recovered from his ordeal, sleeping most of the first day and nursing his battered body. On the 4th morning, as he considered moving on as planned, a knock came at his door. It was Silas, the mine foreman. "Miss Owens is asking for you," he said. "She's back at her house now under the doctor's orders to rest, but she's insistent on seeing you." Quentin hesitated. In his experience, lingering led to complications, and complications led to pain. But something about Audrey Owens had gotten under his skin, her courage, perhaps, or the way her eyes had held his in those desperate hours underground. "I'll go," he said at last. Audrey's house sat on a small rise overlooking the town, a modest but well-maintained structure that spoke of comfort rather than luxury. A young Mexican woman answered his knock, introducing herself as Elena, Audrey's housekeeper, before leading him to a sunlit sitting room. Audrey was there, her legs splinted and propped on a footstool, a book open on her lap. When she looked up, Quentin was struck again by her remarkable composure. Without the grime of the mine, she was even more striking: auburn hair neatly braided, complexion fair despite the sun of the desert region, and those penetrating hazel eyes. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said, setting aside her book. "I was beginning to think you'd left town without allowing me to properly thank you." "No need for thanks, Miss Owens." He stood awkwardly, hat in hands. "Please sit." She gestured to a chair near her. "And I insist on thanking you. You saved my life at tremendous risk to your own." As he reluctantly sat, Elena brought tea and then discreetly withdrew. "I've spoken with my foreman," Audrey continued. "The collapse damaged a significant portion of the main tunnel, but the new vein I discovered remains accessible through the south shaft. Once it's properly reinforced, the mine can continue operations." Quentin nodded, unsure why she was sharing these details with him. "I'd like to offer you a position," she said directly. "As my security manager, the mine will need protection, especially once word spreads about the new silver vein." Quentin's surprise must have shown on his face, for she smiled, a genuine expression that softened her businesslike demeanor. "I don't normally hire men I've known for less than a week," she added, "but I believe 12 hours trapped in a mountain together builds a certain trust, don't you?" "Miss Owens, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not one for staying in one place. I was actually planning to move on tomorrow." Her smile faded slightly. "May I ask why? Silas mentioned you've been working odd jobs around town for nearly a month. What's waiting for you elsewhere?" "Nothing in particular," he admitted. "That's rather the point." Audrey studied him thoughtfully. "The war?" she asked quietly. Quentin stiffened. "What makes you say that, the way you carry yourself?" "My father fought. He never quite left it behind either." She paused. "Whatever you're running from, Mr. Zimmerman, it follows you regardless of how many towns you pass through." Her perception was unsettling. Since Appomattox, Quentin had avoided any situation that might lead to attachment to people, to places, to possibilities. The horrors he'd witnessed had left him convinced that loss was inevitable, making connection too painful a proposition. "I'll consider your offer," he said finally, though he had no intention of accepting. "That's all I ask." She reached for a small box on the table beside her. "This is yours, regardless of your decision." Inside the box was a silver pocket watch with an intricate engraving of a mountain range on the case. "It was my father's," she explained. "I want you to have it. Time is precious, Mr. Zimmerman. You taught me that." The gift left him speechless. He closed the case, feeling the weight of it, both physical and symbolic. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will," she said firmly. "Consider it compensation for your rescue if that makes it easier." Before he could argue further, Alina returned to announce another visitor, the town mayor, coming to inquire after Audrey's health. Quentin took the opportunity to escape, pocketing the watch despite his misgivings. That night, sitting on the porch of the boarding house, Quentin found himself turning the watch over in his hands repeatedly. Something about Audrey Owens disturbed his carefully maintained detachment. Perhaps it was the way she'd looked at him in the mine, not with fear or desperation, but with a clear-eyed trust that he found both flattering and frightening. The next morning, instead of packing his meager belongings, Quentin found himself walking toward the mine. Workers were already busy clearing debris and reinforcing the entrance. Silas spotted him and waved him over. "Glad to see you, Zimmerman. Miss Owens mentioned she offered you a position." "I haven't accepted," Quentin clarified, "but you're here." Silas smiled knowingly. "Come, let me show you what we're dealing with." For the next several hours, Quentin toured the mine operations with Silas. The older man explained the security concerns. Silver theft had been a problem in neighboring mines, and claimed jumpers were always a risk once word of a rich strike spread. By afternoon, Quentin realized he'd made his decision when he'd gotten out of bed that morning. Something about Audrey Owens, her determination, her directness, her unexpected vulnerability had broken through his resolve to remain unattached. He returned to her house, finding her on the porch, a ledger on her lap. "The job," he said without preamble. "I accept." Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I hoped you would." The next few weeks established a routine. Quentin organized security for the mine, hiring 2 additional men and implementing procedures to prevent theft. As Audrey recovered, she began making brief visits to oversee operations, though she relied heavily on Quentin's and Silas's reports. During this time, Quentin learned more about Audrey's past. Her father, Harold Owens, had been a respected mining engineer who'd come west from Pennsylvania in 1858. Her mother had died of fever when Audrey was 14, leaving her father to raise her alone. He'd educated her as he might have a son, teaching her geology, engineering, and business, unusual for a young woman, but preparation for the legacy he hoped to leave her. "People thought he was foolish," she told Quentin during one of their now regular evening conversations on her porch. "A mining man with no sons, training his daughter to take over a business no woman was supposed to run. But he believed in me." "He was right to," Quentin replied. In the weeks since the accident, he'd witnessed her sharp intelligence and natural leadership. Despite her youth, she was just 26. The miners respected her knowledge and decision-making. Gradually, Quentin shared pieces of his own history growing up on a small farm in Missouri, joining the Union Army at 19, the battles that still haunted his dreams. He spoke little of the years since the war, those rootless days of drifting from town to town, taking whatever work allowed him to move on when restlessness inevitably struck. As summer gave way to autumn, Audrey's leg healed enough for her to resume most normal activities, though she still walked with a slight limp that the doctor warned might be permanent. The mine operations expanded as the new silver vein proved even richer than anticipated, bringing prosperity to Keeler and solidifying Audrey's position as a successful mine owner. It was during this prosperous period that trouble arrived in the form of Victor Thornton, a wealthy investor from San Francisco who'd gotten wind of the Silver Summit strike. He appeared in Audrey's office one September morning, his expensive suit and gold watch marking him as an outsider in the dusty mining town. "Miss Owens," he said after introductions, "I've come to make you an offer for your mine." Audrey raised an eyebrow. "The Silver Summit isn't for sale, Mr. Thornton." "Everything has a price," he countered smoothly. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000, a generous sum that would allow you to live comfortably anywhere you choose. The mine is worth considerably more than that, she replied coolly. But again, it's not for sale at any price. Thornton's pleasant expression hardened slightly. A woman in your position might want to consider the practical aspects of mining operations. It's a dangerous business, as your recent accident demonstrated. Perhaps a more suitable arrangement. I believe Miss Owens has made her position clear, Quentin interrupted from where he stood by the door. His hand rested casually near his holstered Colt. Thornton appraised Quentin with clear disdain. And you are? Quentin Zimmerman, head of security for Silver Summit Mining Company. I see. Thornton turned back to Audrey. Consider my offer, Miss Owens. I'll be staying at the hotel for several days. Mining claims can be uncertain. Accidents happen. Legal disputes arise. It would be a shame if your father's legacy became entangled in such complications. After he left, Audrey sat quietly, her expression troubled. He's threatening you, Quentin said, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Not the first time, she replied. When a woman succeeds in a man's world, some men take it as a personal affront. She looked up at Quentin. But this feels different. He has resources, connections. I'll increase security at the mine, Quentin assured her. And I think you should have someone watching your house as well. The next few days passed tensely. Thornton made no further direct approaches, but Quentin spotted his men, two rough-looking characters observing the mine operations and Audrey's movements around town. On the fourth day after Thornton's visit, disaster struck again. Quentin was at the mine when a worker came running from the new southern tunnel, shouting about water. The lower tunnel's flooding, the man gasped. Something's breached the wall near the underground spring. Quentin and Silas rushed to the affected tunnel. Water was indeed pouring in through what appeared to be a recently created opening in the tunnel wall. The workers were evacuating, but the flood threatened to damage the richest part of the new silver vein. This wasn't natural, Silas said grimly as they assessed the damage. Someone deliberately broke through the barrier we'd built to contain that spring. Quentin examined the broken timbers and displaced rocks. Explosives. Small charge, but effective. They managed to evacuate all workers safely, but the tunnel required extensive repairs before mining could resume in that section. When Quentin brought the news to Audrey, her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Thornton," she said. "It has to be. I agree, but proving it will be difficult." That evening, as Quentin walked Audrey home from the mine office, they discussed security improvements. The conversation continued on her porch, where they often lingered to enjoy the cool evening air and the view of the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "I won't be intimidated into selling," Audrey declared, her voice firm despite the worry evident in her eyes. "This mine isn't just my livelihood, it's my father's dream, my future." "No one's asking you to sell," Quentin assured her, though the pragmatic part of him recognized the danger Thornton represented. Men with money and power rarely accepted defeat gracefully. As if reading his thoughts, Audrey turned to him suddenly. "Would you think me foolish if I refused an offer that could set me up for life, simply because of sentiment?" Quentin considered the question carefully. "There was a time I might have," he admitted. "When I first came to Keeler, I didn't understand putting down roots, committing to something that could be taken away. And now," he met her gaze, "now I think some things are worth fighting for." Something shifted in that moment, a recognition passing between them that transcended their professional relationship. Quentin had been aware for weeks of his growing feelings for Audrey, but he'd suppressed them, maintaining the barriers he'd built around his heart since the war. But as they sat together in the gathering darkness, those barriers seemed suddenly insubstantial. When Audrey's hand found his, he didn't pull away. "I never properly thanked you," she said softly. "Not just for saving my life, but for staying, for helping me protect what matters." "You offered me a place when I didn't know I needed one," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm the one who should be thanking you." The distance between them disappeared as Audrey leaned forward, her lips meeting his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with surprising intensity. Quentin's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, all his carefully maintained restraint dissolving in the warmth of her embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Audrey smiled with a mixture of wonder and mischief. "Well," she said, "I suppose that changes things." Before Quentin could respond, a shot rang out from the darkness beyond the porch. The bullet splintered the wooden column inches from Audrey's head. Instinct took over. Quentin pushed Audrey to the floor, covering her body with his own as he drew his revolver. 2 more shots followed in quick succession, one shattering the window behind them. "Stay down," he ordered, scanning the darkness for the shooter. From the angle of the shots, they were coming from the scrubby hillside east of the house. Quentin returned fire, aiming toward the muzzle flashes he'd glimpsed. There was a cry of pain, then the sound of someone crashing through brush in retreat. Only when he was certain the danger had passed did Quentin help Audrey to her feet and into the house, where Alina was already lighting lamps, her face pale with fear. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, examining Audrey for injuries. "No," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "But it seems Mr. Thornton has escalated from property damage to attempted murder." Quentin's face hardened. "I'm going after him." "Not alone," she protested. "I won't risk your safety again." He checked his revolver, reloading the spent chambers. "I'll gather some men and confront Thornton tonight." Despite Audrey's objections, Quentin left after ensuring the house was secure, with Alina's husband Ramon staying as additional protection. He quickly assembled a group: the sheriff, Silas, and 2 trusted miners who'd served in the war. They found Thornton at the hotel's saloon, playing cards as if he hadn't just orchestrated an attempt on Audrey's life. His surprise seemed genuine when they confronted him, but Quentin wasn't fooled. "One of your men tried to kill Miss Owens tonight," Quentin stated flatly. "After your mining operation failed to persuade her." Thornton's expression remained impassive. "A serious accusation, Mr. Zimmerman. Do you have proof?" "We will," the sheriff interjected. "One of the shooters was hit. We'll find him, and I suspect he'll be eager to implicate the man who hired him." A flicker of unease crossed Thornton's face, quickly masked. "I came to Keeler to make a business proposition, nothing more. If Miss Owens has enemies, perhaps she should consider why that might be, rather than accusing respected businessmen." The confrontation ended in a stalemate, with the sheriff warning Thornton to remain available for questioning. As they left the hotel, Quentin's frustration was palpable. "He's too clever to leave evidence connecting him directly," he told Silas. "We need to find that wounded shooter." They organized a search, but the night yielded nothing. By morning, however, news arrived that a man with a gunshot wound to his shoulder had sought treatment in the neighboring town of Lone Pine. The sheriff rode out immediately to investigate. Meanwhile, Quentin returned to Audrey's house, finding her already dressed and preparing to head to the mine despite the previous night's danger. "You can't seriously intend to go about business as usual," he protested. "What would you have me do?" she countered. "Hide in my house while Thornton drives me out of business. That's exactly what he wants." "At least let me stay with you," her expression softened. "I was counting on it." As they walked toward the mine office, Audrey's hand slipped into his, a public declaration that would certainly set tongues wagging in the small community. Quentin found, somewhat to his surprise, that he didn't mind. The day passed tensely. Extra guards were posted at the mine, and Quentin rarely left Audrey's side. By afternoon, news arrived from Lone Pine the sheriff had indeed found the wounded man, who'd initially claimed to have been injured in a hunting accident. Under pressure, however, he'd admitted to being hired for a job in Keeler, though he insisted he didn't know the name of the man who'd paid him. The description matched one of the men seen with Thornton, but not Thornton himself. "It's not enough," Quentin said grimly when the sheriff's deputy brought the news. "Thornton will deny any connection." "Then we need to force his hand," Audrey replied, a determined gleam in her eye. "Make him reveal himself." That evening, after considerable debate, they formulated a plan. Audrey would publicly announce her willingness to discuss Thornton's offer, requesting a meeting at her office the following morning. Meanwhile, Quentin and the sheriff would position men to observe and intervene if necessary. "I don't like using you as bait," Quentin said as they finalized the details. "It's my mine, my fight," she reminded him, "and I trust you to keep me safe." The plan was set in motion. Word was sent to Thornton, who readily agreed to the meeting. As night fell, Quentin insisted on staying at Audrey's house, taking a position in the front room while she retired to her bedroom. Sleep eluded him. Every sound, the creaking of the house settling, the distant howl of a coyote, brought him to full alertness. His mind churned with concern for Audrey's safety, but also with the implications of their changed relationship. The kiss they'd shared before the shooting had awakened feelings he'd long suppressed. For the first time in years, he found himself contemplating a future beyond the next town, the next temporary job. It terrified him almost as much as it exhilarated him. Near midnight, he heard Audrey's bedroom door open. She appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I can't sleep," she said simply. "Neither can I." She crossed to where he sat and lowered herself beside him. "I keep thinking about tomorrow, about Thornton, and about us." "Us," he repeated, the word still strange on his tongue after so many years of solitude. "Is there an us, Quentin? Or was that kiss merely the product of a tense moment?" In answer, he drew her to him, his lips finding hers in the darkness. This time, their kiss held none of the tentativeness of their first embrace. It was a declaration, a promise, a commitment that surprised them both with its intensity. When they finally parted, Audrey rested her head against his chest, her heartbeat gradually slowing to match his. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered. "Just hold me." And so he did, following her to her bedroom where they lay together atop the quilt, his arms encircling her as she nestled against him. There was an innocence to their embrace, a comfort that transcended physical desire, though that undercurrent hummed between them as well. Morning came too quickly. They rose with the dawn, preparing for the confrontation with Thornton. Audrey dressed with particular care, selecting a tailored burgundy dress that projected confidence and authority. "How do I look?" she asked, turning before him. "Like a woman no sensible man would cross," he replied with a smile that didn't quite hide his concern. "Then let's hope Victor Thornton has at least a modicum of sense." The walk to the mine office was tense. Quentin noted the positions of the men the sheriff had placed, two on the rooftops of buildings opposite the office, one inside the assay office next door. Quentin himself would remain in the small room adjacent to Audrey's office, door ajar, within earshot and reach. Thornton arrived precisely at the appointed time, immaculately dressed as always, his manner courteous as Audrey invited him into her office. "I'm pleased you've reconsidered my offer, Miss Owens," he began once seated. "I believe you'll find it most generous. Actually, Mr. Thornton, I've reconsidered your methods, not your offer. Audrey's voice was steady, revealing none of the nervousness Quentin knew she felt. Flooding my mind and attempting to have me shot seem rather extreme negotiating tactics. Thornton's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying, but I assure you I had nothing to do with any such incidents. The shooter we apprehended in Lone Pine says differently, she bluffed. He's provided quite detailed information about who hired him and why. A flicker of alarm crossed Thornton's face, quickly masked. Desperate criminals will say anything to save themselves. If someone's implicated me, they're lying. Perhaps, Audrey conceded. But the evidence is compelling enough for the federal marshal, who should be arriving this afternoon. Mining claim disputes fall under federal jurisdiction, particularly when they involve attempted murder. Quentin, listening from the next room, had to admire her performance. There was no federal marshal coming. The closest was in Sacramento, but Thornton wouldn't know that. The investor rose suddenly. I believe this meeting is over, Miss Owens. I came in good faith to discuss business, not to be slandered. Sit down, Mr. Thornton, Audrey said firmly. We haven't finished our discussion. What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. Thornton drew a derringer from his coat pocket, aiming it directly at Audrey's heart. I tried to be reasonable, he snarled, his cultivated manner evaporating. I offered you fair compensation for a claim that a woman has no business running anyway, but you forced my hand. Quentin burst through the door, his Colt already drawn, but Thornton was prepared. He swung his aim toward Quentin, firing before Quentin could get a clear shot. The bullet caught Quentin in the left shoulder, spinning him against the doorframe. Despite the searing pain, he maintained his grip on his weapon and returned fire. His shot caught Thornton in the chest, dropping him to the floor. Audrey screamed, rushing to Quentin's side as he slid down the wall, blood seeping through his shirt. Outside, hearing the shots, the sheriff and his men converged on the office. The next hours passed in a blur for Quentin. The doctor removed the bullet from his shoulder, declaring him lucky the round had missed major blood vessels and bone. Thornton was less fortunate, pronounced dead at the scene, the derringer still clutched in his hand. Audrey never left Quentin's side during his treatment, her face pale but composed. When the doctor finally allowed him to be moved to her house for recovery, the boarding house being deemed too noisy and lacking proper care, she personally oversaw every aspect of his comfort. You could have been killed, she said that evening, sitting beside his bed, her fingers gently stroking his forehead. Because of me, because of my stubborn refusal to sell. Because of a greedy man who thought he could take what wasn't his, Quentin corrected. And I'm glad you're stubborn. It's one of the things I love about you. The word slipped out before he could consider its implications, but seeing Audrey's face illuminate with joy, he couldn't regret it. You love me, she asked softly. I do, he replied, the admission surprisingly easy now that it had been spoken. I think I have since those 12 hours in the mine, watching you refuse to give up hope even when trapped beneath half a mountain. She leaned down to kiss him gently. I love you too, Quentin Zimmerman, my reluctant hero who can't seem to stop saving me. His recovery took several weeks, during which the Silver Summit mine resumed full operations. The collapse of Thornton's schemes came with an unexpected benefit. His company's claims on neighboring properties came under investigation, revealing several instances of fraud. When the dust settled, Audrey was able to purchase 2 adjacent claims at a favorable price, expanding the Silver Summit's holdings considerably. As autumn deepened toward winter, Quentin found himself contemplating something he hadn't considered in years: a permanent home. His shoulder had healed well enough for him to resume most duties, though he sometimes felt an ache when the weather changed. The restlessness that had driven him for 6 years had subsided, replaced by a contentment he'd thought forever beyond his reach. One evening in early December, as they sat before the fireplace in Audrey's parlor, she broached the subject that had been increasingly on both their minds. "Winter's coming," she observed. "In your drifting days, would this be when you'd move on to warmer climates?" Quentin smiled. "Are you asking if I'm planning to leave?" "Perhaps I'm asking what would make you want to stay," she replied, her gaze steady on his face. "Beyond a job." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I can think of a compelling reason. She's stubborn, brilliant, runs a silver mine better than any man I've met, and somehow loves a drifter who took 6 years to find his way to her." Audrey's eyes brightened with unshed tears. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Zimmerman?" "It is, Miss Owens, if you'll have me." Her answer came in the form of a kiss that left no doubt about her feelings. They were married on Christmas Day, 1876, in the small church in Keeler. The town turned out in force, curious to witness the union of the woman who ran the Silver Summit mine and the drifter turned security chief who'd saved her life. Silas stood as Quentin's best man, and Alina as Audrey's maid of honor. As they exchanged vows, snow began to fall outside, a rare occurrence in the high desert, taken by the townsfolk as a favorable omen for the couple's future. The following spring brought new beginnings. Construction began on a larger house for the Zimmermans on a ridge overlooking both the town and the mine. Audrey, whose business acumen had never wavered, negotiated contracts with the railroad to transport the silver summits ore directly to smelters in San Francisco, increasing their profits substantially. Quentin, for his part, expanded his role beyond security to become Audrey's full partner in the mining operations. His experiences in Colorado proved valuable as they explored new techniques for extracting the silver more efficiently. In June 1877, Audrey shared news that brought Quentin more joy than he'd thought possible. They were expecting a child. The pregnancy progressed well through summer and autumn, though Audrey reluctantly reduced her time at the mine as her condition advanced. Their son, Harold Quentin Zimmerman, was born on a clear January morning in 1878, named for both Audrey's father and his own. Looking at his son's tiny features, Quentin felt the last of his wartime ghosts finally fade. Here was a future worth building, worth protecting. The Silver Summit mine continued to prosper over the following years. By 1880, it had become one of the most productive silver operations in Eastern California. The Zimmermans' wealth grew accordingly, though they maintained relatively modest lives by the standards of successful mine owners. Much of their profits were reinvested in the mine, in the town of Keeler, and in trust funds for Harold and, eventually, his sister, Emma Rose, who joined the family in 1881. Keeler itself grew with the success of the mine. What had been a dusty outpost transformed into a proper town with a school, a larger church, and even a small theater where traveling shows sometimes performed. Audrey was instrumental in many of these improvements, particularly the school, insisting that girls receive the same education as boys, a revolutionary notion at the time. Quentin often marveled at the turn his life had taken. From rootless drifter to husband, father, and respected businessman, all because he'd happened to be riding past when a mine collapsed with a remarkable woman inside. On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Quentin took Audrey back to the entrance of the old tunnel where he dug for 12 hours to find her. The area had been closed off after the collapse, but they picked their way carefully to the spot. "It seems smaller now," Audrey commented, looking at the overgrown entrance. In my memories, it's enormous, a gaping mouth ready to swallow the world. Quentin slipped his arm around her waist. For me, it's where my life began again. Everything before was just waiting. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Do you ever miss it? The freedom of drifting, answering to no one. Never, he said honestly. What I thought was freedom was really just running. This you, our children, our life here, this is true freedom. As they stood together in the fading light, the silver-flecked mountains turning gold in the sunset, Quentin reflected on the strange workings of fate. A mine collapse that should have meant death had instead given life to Audrey, certainly, but also to him, to the man buried beneath years of wandering and wartime trauma. In saving her, he had saved himself. By 1886, 10 years after the collapse that brought them together, the Zimmermans had established themselves as one of the most respected families in Inyo County. Their children were thriving. Harold showing his mother's aptitude for geology and mathematics. Emma Rose developing her father's quiet strength and observant nature. The Silver Summit mine continued to produce, though the richest veins had been largely exhausted. Anticipating this, Audrey and Quentin had diversified their investments, purchasing agricultural land in the fertile valleys to the west and establishing a freight company that served the mining communities throughout the region. On warm evenings, they still sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set beyond the mountains. Sometimes they spoke of the future of Harold's education at the university in Berkeley, of Emma Rose's determination to become a doctor, despite the obstacles facing women in medicine. Sometimes they reminisced about the past, about those 12 desperate hours in the darkness that had changed both their lives forever. But mostly, they simply enjoyed the present, the life they had built together, from the rubble of a collapsed mine, and the courage to begin again. And every night, before retiring, Quentin would wind the silver pocket watch that Audrey had given him all those years ago. Its steady ticking was a reminder of the precious nature of time and of how, sometimes, 12 hours could be enough to find something worth keeping for a lifetime.